So the other night I finished the Resident Evil 4 remake, and wow, bravo Capcom, bravo fucking oh, because you really fucking nailed this remake. Now, initially, back when this remake was just an open secret and Capcom didn't even reveal it yet, I was very skeptical about RE4 receiving a remake. I was like, yeah, sure, the original game's controls can be a little wonky, but it's not that bad. I've always thought that people overstated how bad the tank controls in the original game are. But whenever I play the original game on my PS5, I'm like, yeah, I can understand a little bit more why people feel this game needs a remake. Playing that game on a modern controller, at least for me, is kind of wonky. It's not unplayable or anything, but when I play that game with a GameCube controller, it's like second nature. Now, I don't know if that's because I've played the game literally over 30 times on my GameCube, and I'm just used to playing it on a GameCube controller, or it's because the GameCube controller is literally what the original game was made specifically for. It's probably a mixture of both, I'd say, but obviously at this point I'm sure that most people don't have access to the GameCube version of the original game anymore, or just don't want to play that version of the game. So with that in mind, I began to be a little bit more open-minded when it came to a remake. And then last June came and Capcom finally revealed that they are working on a Resident Evil 4 remake. And I was excited for the most part, but still was a little skeptical because, at least from the initial trailer, it seemed like the game was going to have a much more serious tone and tone down the campiness, and the campiness of the original game plays a huge factor into why the original game is my favorite game of all time. That game just oozes with charm. But I tried to keep an open mind and said to myself, you know what? Maybe a more serious take on RE4 isn't something to be concerned about at all, and maybe it would actually be a welcomed change. And then the February trailer hit, and it showed that a lot of the goofy, over-the-top shit from the original game is still intact in this remake. Like the minecart section, the section where Mike backs you up. Leon was still spitting one-liners, and that was when I was like, alright, fuck the skepticism. I'm 110% sold on this game now. And the month that followed that trailer was a very excruciating month because I could not wait to get my hands on this game. And then I finally got the game last Monday. And I gotta say, my initial impressions of the game, I was fucking blown away. I was loving the gameplay so goddamn much. I love the addition of being able to parry enemies and avoid fatal blows. And not to mention the stealth. Oh my god, the stealth. It reminded me so much of The Last of Us. I was having a fucking fangasm because Resident Evil 4 and The Last of Us are two of my favorite games of all time. And this game put both of those games in a blender, at least gameplay-wise, and I was like, holy fucking shit. It's like Capcom made this game specifically for me. You can sneak up on enemies and stab them without alerting other enemies like you can in The Last of Us. And again, I love the gameplay in this game so goddamn much. Not everything was perfect, though. Here is something that really fucking annoyed me. When I reached the first typewriter in the game, I noticed that not only could you save your game at a typewriter, but you could also store items. And at first, I was like, holy shit, this is something I really fucking wanted in the original game. Yeah, sure, the original game gives you a lot of item storage, but when I'm playing the original on GameCube, I have so much Magnum ammo, it's not even funny. And I guess the GameCube version is a lot more generous when it comes to dropping Magnum ammo. I don't know, but I wish I could store all of that ammo. And I thought this game was going to make that a reality finally, but unfortunately not. You could really only store your weapons and first aid sprays, and probably some other stuff too, but those are the two things that come to my mind immediately that you can put in storage. Ammo, grenades, herbs, gunpowder, resources, all of that has to stay in your inventory for some fucking reason, and you can't store any of those things. Similar to the GameCube version, in this game, at one point, I was lugging around Magnum ammo I came across for a while, and I didn't want to use that ammo because It's fucking Magnum ammo. If any of you are familiar with Resident Evil, the Magnum guns are the most powerful guns in the game. The guns you use against bosses primarily. You don't just shoot normal enemies willy-nilly with the Magnum, because ammo for the Magnum is so goddamn scarce because, again, the Magnum is the most powerful gun in the game. In every other Resident Evil game with an item box, you can store whatever you want into the item box. I don't know why this game is any different. And also, I want to take a minute to talk about the side quests. When I first heard that this game will have side quests, I was like, how the fuck are they going to incorporate side quests into a game as linear as fuck as Resident Evil 4? But then I remembered, oh yeah, the blue medallions in the original game. That was just one little side quest at the beginning of the original game, but it was still technically a side quest, I guess. And yeah, the blue medallions are back in the remake, and honestly, it got a little tedious after a certain point shooting those blue medallions because there are so many side quests in the game where that's all you have to do, shoot blue medallions. A lot of the side quests consist of either that or killing rats. Not a whole lot of variety when it comes to the side quests, and that's a little disappointing, admittedly. The side quests award you spinels you can use to either customize your case, get certain weapon parts. You can also get maps to tell you where treasure is, or you can also get treasure that you can combine your gems into. I just wish getting those spinels didn't include doing the same thing over and over again, but I digress. It's not that bad. This is more of a nitpick I have with the game. Overall, I do love the gameplay, and if these are the two problems I have with the gameplay, that just really shows how much they fucking nailed the gameplay in this game. So let's finally move on to the story, and by the way, I'm going to bring up some major spoilers in this video, so if you haven't played this remake and want to play this remake, and by God, please do, then don't watch this video any further. Anyway, as a whole, I'd say, yeah, this game does make improvements to the original game's story, but let's be honest, it doesn't really take much to improve the original game's story. Shinji Mikami, the director of the original game, admitted that the original game's story was just something that was slapped together in the matter of like 2 weeks. And if you really think about it, the original game's story is pretty much a more mature version of a Mario game. Just replace saving the princess with saving the president's daughter. And the game does make improvements to some characters. 3 characters definitely stand out to me in this remake. First, let's talk about Luis. We learn a lot more about Luis this time around. On top of just being a researcher for Sadler, we find out that he was also involved with Umbrella, the European division of Umbrella to be exact. You find out via notes you find in the game that he was researching on how to make the Las Plagas a strong bioweapon for Umbrella. And he has a lot more screen time in this game than he did in the original. Instead of just helping you once during the cabin fight, you spend a whole chapter with him in the mines section of the game. In the original game, Leon was completely alone in the mines because at that point, Luis was already dead, but in this game, he dies a little later, and you get to spend this whole section of the game with Luis, and it's honestly a fucking blast teaming up with him, and also fighting those 2 El Gigantes with him. That was a load of fun as well. But I still do take a little bit of contention with his death. Like I said, you mostly find out about Luis's backstory through notes in the game. Luis himself was still very vague with Leon, but when it seemed like he was opening up more to Leon, and it seemed like their relationship is going to expand a bit more, right there is where Krauser stabs Luis, and Luis dies. Look, I wasn't expecting this game to be so different to the point where Luis was going to be there on the jet ski at the end with Leon and Ashley, but still, I do kind of wish he at least made it to the island portion of the game, but whatever. He still lasts a lot longer in this game than he did in the original, and you see a lot more of him as opposed to the original, so I can't complain that much. And since I just brought up Krauser, let's use that as a segue to talk about his character for a little bit. I also like his remake iteration more than the original. In the original, all we knew about Krauser was that at some point, him and Leon were partners in the military. It wasn't until a few years later, in a Wii game, I think, that we got more insight into Krauser's character. But thanks to that Wii game, all of that backstory we got about Krauser in that game was incorporated into this game. However, instead of being military partners, him and Leon have much more of a teacher-student dynamic, because Krauser was the major in this version of the game. Krauser and a team of soldiers were sent to South America to destroy a drug cartel that had ties to Umbrella, but instead, his team got decimated and he was the only survivor, and the US government covered up that operation. I think that is a much more compelling and justifiable backstory, and gives a lot more insight as to why he specifically picked Ashley to kidnap, as opposed to just, he is a bad guy working with Wesker, and has some unexplained hatred for the United States government, and oh yeah, him and Leon were partners at some point in the military, but we're not going to get into that at all. But there is one thing about Krauser in this game that I think is worse. The voice. I think the guy who voiced him in the original game sounded way more cool and menacing, and apparently that guy retired from voice acting and is apparently suffering with dementia now, so obviously he can't reprise the role, but still, I think the guy who voiced him wasn't all that great. Krauser sounds in desperate need of water in the remake. And unfortunately, Krauser isn't the only example of poor voice acting in this remake, but I'll get into that a little later. The final character I want to talk about that this game handled better, and I think this character easily got the biggest improvement in this game over the original, and that is Ashley. She is just awesome in this game. I really wasn't expecting that going into this remake, and I honestly can't think of a single thing I like about the OG character over her remake iteration. It is just inarguable to me. At least story-wise. I'll get into gameplay in a minute. Her arc in this game is a really satisfying one. She starts off as this awkward, timid girl, not exactly a far cry from how her character was in the original game, but eventually she does gain confidence, and again, that is really nice to see. She even helps Leon at certain points in the game. Like, for example, she throws lanterns at nights that make them freeze temporarily. That was really cool. During the cabin fight, I was about to die. My HP was so fucking low. And then Ashley came in clutch and broke open a door and was like, "Leon, Luis, come here!" She also helped Leon out of the burning barn after the Mendez fight by breaking a window. All of these moments where she genuinely wants to help was so refreshing because you don't see any of that really in the original. Minus when she drives the bulldozer, but even then, that's not really much. But she's actually a character in this game. She's not just this object you have to protect like she was in the original. She had some funny moments in the original, sure, but she just lacked so much personality in the original. I never hated the OG character as much as most people seem to. I mean, look at the defense video I made for her a few months ago, but even in that video, I conceded that, she doesn't really have much of a fucking personality, but this remake more than rectified that. I am so happy they got rid of that stupid cutscene where she blows up at Leon out of nowhere, runs away from him, and then perfectly aligns herself for such an obvious trap in the wall. In the remake, she runs away from Leon for a much more justifiable reason. The Plagas takes control of her for a minute, she tries to kill Leon, and then when she regains control, she gets scared that she'll hurt Leon again and runs away from him. I've seen some people say in the original her blowing up at Leon for no reason was the Plagas taking control of her for a second, but they could have made that way more obvious, like showing her eyes turn red like they did with her in a couple of other points in the game, or like they did with Leon when he choked out Ada at that one point in the original game. So I'm just going to chalk up that cutscene in the original to stupid writing. Anyway, let's move on to Ashley and gameplay. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I actually prefer OG Ashley when it comes to gameplay. OG Ashley always stuck behind you like glue, whereas Remake Ashley had a tendency to wander off and get grabbed by enemies. Now, I'll fully concede that this may be a skill issue. I'm not going to make the same mistake I made with the OG game where at first I just sucked at protecting her and just wanted to pass the blame onto the game. But I still do miss how OG Ashley was always behind you at all times unless you commanded her otherwise. In this game, you can't even command her to stand still. You can only command her to stick close to you, or to stray away from you a little bit more. You can't command her to stand perfectly still like you could in the original. And I also kinda miss Ashley having her own health bar. I know at times that got annoying, using a first aid spray on Ashley instead of Leon. And you're potentially putting Leon at risk, because what if you use a full heal on Ashley, and then you get in trouble later on and you don't have a full heal to use on Leon. But at least OG Ashley could tank a few hits. Remake Ashley, if she gets hit once, she gets into this incapacitated state. Leon has to stop mid-combat to resuscitate her. And if she gets hit once during this state, it is game over. I much prefer just healing her as opposed to stopping mid-combat to resuscitate her, but that's just me. So overall, in terms of character, I 1000% prefer Remake Ashley over OG Ashley, but when it comes to gameplay, I say, at least for now, OG Ashley has the edge, but who knows? Maybe in a few years from now I'll be laughing at myself for saying all this about Remake Ashley when it comes to gameplay, and I'll make a Remake RE4 Ashley isn't that bad video, or whatever the fuck. One more thing I want to touch up on in this video are the characters I think were done worse in this remake. I prefer how all the villains were handled in the original over the remake. Let's start with the Village Chief, or what I like to call the Big Cheese. I'll admit, this isn't a huge complaint by any means, but I kinda wish he would shut the fuck up during his boss fight. I like the way he was handled in the original. In the original game, in the words of Tony Soprano, he was the strong, silent type. The entire fight, he was rambling about his fundamentalist bullshit, and honestly, after a certain point, I was like, okay, I get it, I don't care, please shut up. Please go back to the way you were in the original, where you hardly said a word. I think that "you carry the same blood as us" line is literally the only line of dialogue he has in the original game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Salazar isn't nearly as fun in the remake like he was in the original. I miss funny cutscenes like Leon stabbing his hand, or Leon asking him if his right hand comes off. That isn't to say the goofiness is completely gone. Him and Leon still have that exchange where Salazar says, "You're nothing but an extra in my script anyway," and Leon is like, "I don't remember ever being part of your crappy script," except this time it's during his boss fight. But he's not nearly as memorable in this game like he was in the original. He was my favorite villain in the original game because of how funny he was. He was this cocky little shit that over time was growing more and more frustrated with his inability to kill Leon, and that was so funny to see. A lot of his appearances were during those radio commissions that Leon received throughout the original game, which are still present here in the remake, but this time around, it's only allies communicating with Leon, like, of course, Hunnigan at the beginning of the game, and also this time around, Luis and Ada, but none of the villains communicate with Leon this way in the remake. And I honestly miss the villains communicating with Leon this way because it added so much character to them. Salazar still communicates with Leon via an intercom in the castle, but it's not nearly as frequent as the original when he talked to Leon through transmission. Sadler's character, I feel, is also worse in the remake. Much like Salazar, he doesn't communicate with Leon through those transmissions anymore. I think like once or twice in the game, he communicates with Leon via telepathy. And this time around, Leon doesn't even meet him in the flesh until the game is almost over during the island portion of the game. I miss him taunting you throughout the game, more particularly in those radio transmissions in the island section of the original game. He was this overconfident douchebag, always taunting Leon, while Leon killed two of his top men, plowed through all of the village, all of the castle, and the island, and also killed Krauser, yet he never thought for 1 second, oh shit, this guy may actually be a legitimate threat. He still has that confidence in the original, but you don't see nearly enough of it because, again, you don't really see his character all that much before, like, 85% of the game is done. Maybe it was intentional to not have his character be as prevalent in the remake as it was in the original, but I think that just makes for a less memorable villain this time around. But one character in this remake is done so much worse than the original, and that has to go to Ada. That voice actress they picked for Ada in this game, oh my god, what the fuck were they thinking? The voice actress in this game for Ada sounds so flat and bored. She's just reading lines off of a script and not putting any character into those lines. Ada was always this mysterious femme fatale type of character, and her voice and every other iteration of her character perfectly reflected that. This voice actress was just not it, and I am not looking forward to the Separate Ways campaign starring Ada if the voice actress is still going to be this flat and bored sounding. And I don't know if it's just me, but even the mixing of her voice sounds a bit off. It sounds like the voice actress voiced the lines in the bathroom or some shit. It doesn't sound as clean as all the other characters sound. Every scene with her just took me out of the game and broke the immersion because of how awful awful the voice sounds. So Ada was a huge miss in this remake, and it's so goddamn disappointing. But anyway, with all of that out of the way, do I like this remake more than the original? Probably not. I love this remake so much, don't get me wrong. Of course, I have my gripes with it, but I also have my gripes with the original. No game is perfect, but still, at least when it comes down to characters and charm, I think the original beats this game hands down, but when it comes to gameplay, this game is probably better. At least, it should be better because, there's an 18-year gap between the original and this game. And also, not to mention, I've played the original over 30 times at this point, and I've only played this remake only once so far, so I need at least a few more playthroughs to let this remake completely sink in for me. But the original is just such a fucking special game to me. It has this charm that just remains unmatched. I like the remake's more serious tone. I do enjoy that it differentiates itself, but I just absolutely love the campiness of the original game. And that's why this doesn't replace the original game for me. And this probably goes without saying, but you bet your ass, even with this remake out, I'm still going to replay the original game. And also, I've been seeing a lot of, quite frankly, really dumb revisionism surrounding the original game since the release of the remake. I've been seeing a lot of people say shit like, oh, playing the original game is so redundant now with this vastly superior remake out. The original game's controls are so fucking garbage. It's so unplayable by today's standards. And this game cut out my favorite boss from the original, the U3, the monster that chases Leon around in a container rig. And even over 30 playthroughs later, when I'm playing the original game, that boss fight still makes me feel tense because of the closed space Leon is in. This big monster is chasing him around. The atmosphere and environment for that boss was just fucking perfect, and I'm so disappointed to not see that boss, at least in the main campaign. There's rumblings that it may come back in Ada's side story. But I've seen people say shit like, good, that boss was shitty anyway, always a low point of the original game. It's like if Capcom thinks something is worth removing, everyone else should just not question that and just follow along with Capcom. Because I've never really seen anyone say anything negative about that boss fight until after the remake came out and it was found out that that boss was removed. And I've also seen this stupid sentiment floating around. This remake blows the original out of the water so fucking much that you'd have to be some hardcore purist or completely blinded by nostalgia to even want to go back and play the original. Like, no. I love this remake, but I also really love the original. It is my favorite game of all time. This remake had huge shoes to fill, and just because it doesn't exactly fill those shoes doesn't mean I'm clouded by nostalgia and hate this remake. Why do I have to just love one and hate the other? My philosophy is, this remake is amazing. The original is also amazing. Now I have two amazing versions of this game to play. Awesome! Double win! Though I was saying to myself in the months leading up to this remake, even if this remake is objectively better than the original in every conceivable way, it's not, but let's just say hypothetically it is, I could see myself still being stubborn and saying, nah, the original is still better. Because the original is just such a special game to me, and it has nothing to do with nostalgia either. I was only 19 when I first started playing this game, just a little under 3 years ago, and the first time I played this game was around, I think, either October or November of 2020, which was the worst period of my life because at that point I was only a month or two removed from my grandmother passing away. I was still overcome with grief, still in the denial phase over my grandmother's death, and was just finding it really hard to cope with. And then I played this game, and not to say that Resident Evil 4 completely washed away my grief for my grandmother, not by any means, but it provided a nice escape away from that grief because I just had so much fun playing that game and I fell in love with it almost instantly after getting used to the controls. And since then, it's become my comfort game. A game that I go to where I know for a fucking fact I'm going to have a great time. I know this is all sentimental shit that has nothing to do with the actual quality of the game, but I'm just saying this game holds such a special place in my heart, and the remake would have to provide an absolutely mind-blowing experience for it to be able to dethrone the original in my mind. And speaking of mind-blowing, let's actually talk about the quality of the original game now. The original game, back when it released in 2005, was just that for many people. Few games sent shockwaves across the industry like OG RE4 did. It fucking laid out the blueprint for every modern, over-the-shoulder, third-person game to follow. If your favorite game has an over-the-shoulder, third-person perspective, where every time your character aims a weapon, the game closes in on their shoulder, you have the original Resident Evil 4 to thank for literally inventing that style of gameplay. That's why I'm so tired of seeing all this shit flung at the original game now that the remake is out. You like the remake more than the original. Fine, more power to you. I completely respect your opinion. But just because the remake is out now does not automatically mean the original is this worthless pile of shit not worth going back to, and the only people going back and playing the original game are these people who are clouded by nostalgia, supposedly. The goal of this game was not to replace the original, otherwise it would have been a one-to-one remake where there were no differences whatsoever besides prettier graphics. Last of Us. Rather, it's a companion piece to complement the original and celebrate the original's legacy. These two games excel at different aspects and have two completely different vibes, and that is why one does not cancel out the other. So instead of uselessly bickering over which version is better, let's all collectively recognize Resident Evil 4 for the masterpiece that it is, and just be happy that we now have two incredible versions of the same game to play. So overall, the remake of Resident Evil 4 is fucking great, and I cannot recommend it enough. If you haven't played either version, you're severely missing out. That's all I have to say. Bye-bye.